If you are just rucking and running for cardio, you are missing the keys to developing what I call relentless endurance, which is the ability not just to crush your timed events, but to transition seamlessly from one to the next with rapid recovery, impressive performance, and an unending engine. In this video, I'm giving you the blueprint and methodology that I use with my athletes to develop relentless endurance, including sample weeks of training at the end. When we compare athlete performance, we often talk in terms of a candidate's best 5-mile run, 12-mile ruck, or how many pull-ups that they hit, but that's not what selection tests for. Depending on the branch, you're looking at several weeks or a multi-month crucible which stacks fatigue, exposes weaknesses, and then expects you to perform. So you can understand how having a great timed 5-mile run or 12-mile ruck is great, but that performance is just a snapshot of your peak endurance in your best state. What matters more is how you perform fatigued. So relentless endurance and peak endurance are two concepts and terms that I will use throughout this video. Peak endurance is what drops jaws with single feats of performance, like running a 30-minute 5-mile, whereas relentless endurance is running 7 30-minute miles, then grinding through a brutal like an overhead circuit, then rucking with 65 pounds while carrying 45-pound dumbbells in each hand, and then after all of that, coming back and grinding out sub 8-minute miles. Now before I share how to develop relentless endurance, I want you to look at this chart. You can see how someone who trains for peak endurance will crush the competition on fresh legs, and without the right training, they will also have a massive drop-off when fatigue sets in, whereas someone who trains for relentless endurance has a minimal drop-off in performance. This concept of relentless endurance explains the anecdote of the cross-country runner who comes out first on the timed events, but then crashes and burns after he's tested in other areas. So now let's dive into the 3 pillars to building relentless endurance. Pillar 1 is exceeding the endurance standards in your peak state, because no matter how conditioned you are, you will not get faster with fatigue. In other words, in order to hit a 35-minute 5-mile on fatigued legs, you need to be running 7-minute miles on fresh legs first. And of course, the higher your peak is, the greater the potential for relentless endurance you will have. Now beyond that, we do have hard data on peak performance being predictive of success. This SFAS study from 2019 shows that candidates in the top quarter of run times had a selection rate over 50%, while the slowest had 21% or less chances of getting selected. And the same is true for rucking, except the difference was even greater, with the bottom quarter of ruckers having a 5% selection rate, and the top quarter having a 67% selection rate. Now you might wonder, why talk about relentless endurance when the data on peak performance is so clear and you can just focus on that? Well, there's 2 main reasons. One is that there's no test or data on what I would call relentless endurance. All that we have are the peak endurance tests. But if they tested 5-mile runs after max push-ups, a max set of 225-pound squats, and a heavy ruck carry, I suspect that the fatigued 5-mile time would be a greater predictor of success. Now because we don't have that data, all we have to go off of is the peak endurance scores. Second is that selection is a crucible, and your cumulative performance is far more important than a snapshot of any event. The reality is, nobody cares how stellar your performance is on day 1 if your performance bleeds every day an hour from that point on. Hyperfixating on those peaked, fresh numbers can be a problem. Even with many athletes I work with, they'll get hyperfixated on the numbers and have goals to be top 5 across the board. And while maximizing performance is my top priority as a coach, we also need to be realistic. If you're a guy who has to work really hard to be a middle-of-the-pack runner, you shouldn't let running a 37-minute 5-mile instead of 35 deter you from shipping. Remember, selection is about testing your performance and your grit, all to identify the best candidates for the job. It's not objective like a 100-meter dash at the Olympics. So in those final months leading up to selection, I'd rather prioritize you being well-rounded and having relentless endurance to ensure you recover quickly and perform across all the events, over fine-tuning your fresh 5-mile pace. So pillar 1 to relentless endurance is exceeding the standards. But what are the standards you should strive for before pivoting your training? For your 2-mile run, most guys should strive for sub 13:20, and on your 5-mile, running under 38 minutes. Both of these numbers are very achievable, even for you big guys or those who have a tougher time running. But anything slower than that, and you're cutting it close, because the benefit of a higher peak is that you can have a rough day and still make the cut. For rucking, I want to see you hitting 8 miles with a 60-pound ruck at a low-intensity heart rate, doing 16-minute miles or faster. That will put you pretty comfortably at sub 14-minute miles when you go to pick up the pace. And a quick caveat is that these are general guidelines. In all my videos, I try to help the most people possible with general information. But the reality is, I would treat you differently if you're 6'6" and 240 versus if you're 5'7" and 150. For working one-on-one, I'll be able to do a full analysis and give my recommendations, training, and the reason behind it. But otherwise, you need to make a judgment call based on what you're comfortable with, and make sure you're referencing the data I've shared in this video and others on performance and selection rates. The second pillar to developing relentless endurance is training endurance under fatigue. Essentially, practicing the skill of performing on tired legs or a pumped upper body will allow you to perform better than if you don't practice those skills. I recommend you incorporate a few of these strategies from day one of your training, but there are a few downsides and you don't want to go overboard. So I'll share a few examples first, and then share when you should and shouldn't do them. Strategy 1 is performing short distance intervals after leg training. For most of my athletes, I program hard running intervals immediately after our heavy, hard lower body or full body session of the week. And the benefit is that not only are these workouts insanely challenging physically and mentally, you'll also realize that after 4 to 6 weeks, you've been physically and mentally sharpened. And then when it comes time to do that final kick in your PST or ACFT, you will have known what it feels like to push hard on spent legs. The other benefit is that by consolidating our most high-stress sessions on the same day, that leaves more time for recovery later in the week. A second example is adding Zone 2 finishers to your strength or metabolic conditioning sessions. This acclimates your body to the rough transitions so many of us have felt where your whole body is pumped, and then you need to slow your breathing and transition to moving your body at a low intensity. As little as 20 to 45 minutes of easy rucking, swimming, or stationary bike is a great addition after your lift. Now, there are downsides though to pre-fatiguing your training, and that's first and foremost that it can detract from the purpose of the endurance session which follows it. For instance, if your goal is to practice max speed 400-meter repeats, it doesn't make sense to do that session after training legs, because you're going to be slower. But if you're comfortable running slower 400-meter repeats at 1.5 or 2 mile goal pace, and making them more challenging than they otherwise would have been fresh, you can still hit that session after legs. When I incorporate endurance training under fatigue, it's highly targeted to the athlete's needs. You don't want all your endurance work done in fatigue state, because that's not how you build peak endurance most effectively. But if you never train under fatigue, you're also missing out on developing that key skill, which is critical for selection. Pillar 3 is functional metabolic conditioning, which in a more specific fashion than pre-fatigued efforts, trains your body's ability to move from event to event and maintain a high work rate. The problem with most metabolic conditioning sessions I see though is that they don't serve a purpose. They're typically a mishmash of calisthenics and cardio that have nothing to do with selection. Whereas what I recommend is tailoring directly to your needs and selection's demands. For instance, for Army candidates, I often focus on 3 main areas: your grip, overhead work, and then leg and core stamina. Here's a sample functional metcon with a focus on grip. You'll go from exercise to exercise with your 65-pound ruck on to add fatigue as you move from carries to walks. And when it comes to incorporating these workouts, I'd wait until you've reached at least Pillar 1's target times. And from there, you can start incorporating them once or twice per week as you reach closer to your ship or selection date. My bonus tip for this video is to do your relentless endurance work, but also watch your recovery. You will see that these sessions are intense. Intervals after legs and metabolic conditioning sessions will push you to 100% if you're doing them right. And then even adding Zone 2 finishers to your calisthenics or lifts will also add some fatigue. Remember though that every session cannot and should not be at 100% effort. If you do that, your progress will stall and you will burn out. Make sure you have 1 to 2 days of low intensity work and at least 1 rest day per week. It's what I do for my athletes and what I recommend for everyone. Leave your training questions in the comments, and if you'd like to work with me one-on-one, the application link is in the description.